handed me a glass of wine on our anniversary, and smiled the way he always did, slow, warm, like he had all the time in the world. "Drink up, sweetheart," he said. "Tonight's just for us." I drank it, and somewhere between the first sip and the second, the room started to tilt. I was 31 years old when I married my husband. He was 38. I thought the age difference meant stability. I thought it meant he'd already done the wild, reckless part of his life and come out the other side as someone steady, someone I could build something with. We had 6 years together. A house in Asheville, North Carolina. A craftsman bungalow with a wraparound porch that I fell in love with before I even stepped inside. I ran a small interior design studio out of the spare bedroom for the first 2 years, then signed a lease on a real space downtown. By the time everything fell apart, I had 4 employees and a wait list. My husband worked in commercial real estate, or so I believed. His name was my husband. That's how I'll refer to him now, because saying his actual name still does something to my chest that I don't have words for yet. My sister was the first one to say something. She was 26, 4 years younger than me, and she had a mouth on her that my mother spent our entire childhood trying to contain. She called me on a Tuesday in March, about 8 months before our anniversary, and she said, "I need to tell you something, and you're going to be mad at me, but I need you to hear me out before you say anything." I said, "Okay." She said she'd seen my husband at the Biltmore Village outdoor market on a Saturday morning. The kind of morning I always slept through because I worked late Fridays. She'd seen him with a woman. They were sharing a pastry from the French bakery stand. His hand was on the small of her back. I was quiet for a long time. Then I told her she must have been mistaken. My husband wasn't the type. We talked about this. He was private, yes, sometimes cold, but not that, not this. My sister had never really liked him, and I knew that, and I told her so gently, and then I hung up and convinced myself she was wrong. I think about that phone call constantly now. She wasn't wrong. The thing about betrayal is that once someone plants the seed of suspicion, you start noticing things you trained yourself not to see. Little gaps in his schedule, weekends where his phone was always face down, a new dress shirt I didn't recognize, folded in the back of his closet, still faintly carrying a smell that wasn't mine and wasn't his cologne. But I was good at rationalizing. I was so good at it. He traveled for work, or what I thought was work. Sometimes gone Monday through Thursday. Once an entire 2 weeks in Charlotte for what he said was a development project. I never questioned it hard enough. I was busy. My design studio was growing. I told myself that a busy marriage was a healthy marriage, that 2 people who had their own lives made for stronger partners. I told myself a lot of things. Our anniversary was June 14th, 6 years. I'd made a reservation at a restaurant up on the ridge, the kind of place with a view that makes you feel like the world is manageable, like everything below you is small enough to hold in your hands. My husband suggested we start the evening at home. A bottle of wine first, he said. Just the 2 of us, before the noise of a restaurant. He'd already opened the bottle when I came downstairs. He was standing in the kitchen, dressed nicely, holding 2 glasses, and he looked, for a moment, exactly like the man I'd married. Relaxed, present. He smiled that slow smile. "You look beautiful," he said. I believed him. I took the glass. I remember the first few sips. I remember sitting on the couch, putting my feet up, feeling the warmth of the wine spread through my chest. I remember him refilling my glass before I noticed it was empty, which should have told me something right there. I remember his voice, low and even, saying, "Just relax. We have time." And then I don't remember very much at all. I came back to myself in stages. First, sound. A low mechanical hum, something vibrating beneath me. Second, light. Dim and flickering, passing in long streaks across the ceiling I didn't recognize. Third, the understanding that I was moving. I was lying across 2 seats on a Greyhound bus. My shoes were on. My coat was buttoned. Someone had arranged me carefully, like a piece of luggage, like something to be transported and delivered. My purse was on my lap. My phone was not in it. There was a bus ticket tucked inside, printed under a name that was not mine, a name I'd never heard before. I sat up slowly. My head felt like it was wrapped in wet cotton. I couldn't think in a straight line. The woman across the aisle glanced at me and then looked away. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know how long I'd been on the bus. The windows showed me darkness and highway, and the occasional pale blur of an exit sign. I opened my purse again, more carefully this time, and dug through it with shaking hands. Lip balm, a crumpled receipt, a hair tie, and then, in the zippered inner pocket, my real driver's license. My actual name. My real address in Asheville. I held it under the window light and read my own name like it was something I needed to memorize. A man in the seat ahead of me, 50s, baseball cap, thermos on the tray, turned around and looked at me. He had kind eyes, the sort of tired kind that comes from working long hours for a long time. "You were out cold when you got on," he said, not unkindly. "Figured I'd let you sleep. Where are we?" I asked. My voice didn't sound like mine. "Just crossed into Tennessee," he said. "You going all the way to Memphis?" I looked at the ticket in my hand. Memphis, Tennessee, one way. I hadn't been to Memphis, Tennessee. One way. I hadn't been to Memphis in my life. The man, I'll call him my fellow passenger because that's what he was, a stranger who happened to be decent, let me use his phone to call my sister. She answered on the second ring, which meant she was still awake even though it was close to midnight. She picked up already nervous, the way she'd been nervous around me since that phone call in March. Careful not to push. "It's me," I said. "I need you to listen to me very carefully." She listened. I told her I was on a bus to Memphis. I told her about the wine. I told her about the ticket with the wrong name. I told her about waking up on a Greyhound somewhere in Tennessee with no phone and a purse that had been carefully searched and reassembled. There was a long silence on the other end. Then she said, "I'm getting in my car." "Don't," I said. "Call the police first." Another pause. "What did he do to you?" I looked at the license in my hand. My name, my photo, my real life. "I don't know all of it yet," I said, "but I think he was trying to make me disappear." She called the police in Asheville. She called them from her car while she was already driving, which is my sister. She does two things at once. When she's scared, it keeps her from falling apart. She told them her sister had been drugged and was on a bus to Memphis. She gave them my name. She told them about my husband. Back home, my husband had already called in a missing persons report. I didn't know this until later, but the timeline is important. He filed it at 11:17 p.m. I had woken up on the bus at approximately 11. He must have planned the window carefully, long enough for me to be far from Asheville before anyone started looking, but soon enough that he could establish himself as the panicked, grieving spouse. The man who didn't know where his wife had gone. He cried, apparently. The officer who took his statement told my sister later that he'd seemed genuinely devastated. He'd said we had dinner at home, that I'd seemed off, possibly drinking too much, possibly upset about something he couldn't identify, and that he'd gone to the garage to get something, and when he came back, I was gone. He said he thought I'd gone for a walk to clear my head. He said he waited 2 hours before he called. All of it was a lie constructed and delivered with the patience of someone who had been rehearsing. The bus stopped in Knoxville. A state trooper was waiting on the platform. It was jarring in a way I can't fully describe, to see someone in uniform walking toward the bus door, and to understand that they were looking for me, that someone had cared enough to find me, that I was not in fact invisible. My sister had done that. My sister, who I'd told was wrong, who I'd essentially accused of jealousy and malice, had gotten in her car at midnight and made phone calls until someone listened. I spent 2 hours in the Knoxville bus station giving a statement. I had a cup of vending machine coffee that tasted like burnt paper, and I held it with both hands because I was still shaking. A victim's advocate sat with me, a woman about my mother's age with reading glasses on a beaded chain, and she asked me questions slowly, patiently, like she had all night, like I was the only thing that mattered. I told her everything I could remember, which wasn't much from the evening itself. The wine. The couch. His voice saying we had time. She wrote it all down. They sent a patrol car to my house that night. My husband answered the door in his pajamas, which he'd almost certainly changed into after I left to make himself look more like a man who'd been home all evening, not a man who'd loaded his sedated wife onto a midnight bus. He was arrested 4 days later. The days between my return and his arrest were the strangest I've ever lived through. My sister drove down from Roanoke and stayed with me. We slept in the same bed like we did when we were children, and she didn't make me talk when I didn't want to, and she made coffee every morning without being asked. My husband had been released pending investigation, which meant he was out there somewhere, and I didn't know if he was in our house or not because I wasn't going back to our house. I stayed in a hotel, a Hampton Inn off the highway, anonymous and clean, with a parking lot I could see from my window. My sister brought me clothes from the house in a duffel bag. She went with a police escort, which still sounds surreal to me when I say it out loud. A police escort to retrieve her sister's clothes from her sister's own home. I called a lawyer on the second day. She was a partner at a small firm in downtown Asheville, someone I'd met years ago through a client, and she had the kind of precise, unflappable energy that made me feel like things were going to be handled. She told me not to contact my husband directly. She told me to document everything I could remember. She told me to get a full toxicology workup, which I'd already done at the hospital in Knoxville. The toxicology report came back positive for a sedative, the kind sometimes used in sleep aids, but at a much higher concentration than you'd find in any over-the-counter product. Someone had measured it carefully. Someone had done research. My lawyer said, "This is not a spontaneous decision. This was planned." I already knew that, but hearing it said out loud, plainly, by someone who dealt in facts, that was different. That settled into me in a different way. The investigation uncovered things I hadn't expected, and things I probably should have. He wasn't a commercial real estate developer. He had been, briefly, early in his career, before I met him. By the time we married, the license had lapsed, and the business existed mostly on paper. He'd been investing heavily in a development project outside Charlotte that had been hemorrhaging money for 2 years. He'd quietly taken out a second mortgage on our house, using documentation that, my lawyer said, bore what appeared to be my signature, though I have no memory of signing anything of the kind. He needed me gone. Not divorced, gone, because if we divorced, I was entitled to half of everything, and there was very little left. But if I disappeared, if I turned up dead on a Tennessee roadside, or simply ceased to exist as a trackable person, there were insurance policies. There were accounts in my name that he would have been positioned to access as my spouse. He planned it for months, maybe longer. The woman my sister had seen him with at the outdoor market was not a romantic partner. Or not only that, she was someone who'd helped him research the sedative, someone he'd met through a forum online. That detail came out during the trial and made the courtroom very, very quiet. I testified. I didn't want to, and then I decided I did. My lawyer prepared me thoroughly. We sat in her conference room for 3 hours the week before, going through every question the prosecution planned to ask, and then she went through the ones the defense might ask too because she wanted me ready for both. She was honest with me. She said the defense would try to suggest I'd taken something myself, that I'd been upset, that I had a history of instability. They would use the gap in my memory against me. You don't have to have a perfect memory, she said. You just have to tell the truth about what you do remember. I did. My husband's attorney was skilled and polished, and he did exactly what my lawyer predicted. He suggested I'd been drinking heavily before the wine, that I was prone to anxiety and had a prescription for something I did, a low-dose medication for situational anxiety, prescribed after a difficult period 2 years earlier. He implied that my sister had coached me. He questioned the chain of custody on the toxicology report. He was thorough. But the prosecution had the bus ticket. They had the security footage from the Asheville bus terminal. My husband's car in the parking lot at 10:43 p.m., him walking me through the entrance with his arm around my waist in a way that looked supportive and was actually something else entirely. They had his phone records, which placed him in contact with the woman from the forum dozens of times over the preceding 4 months. They had the second mortgage paperwork, which a forensic document examiner testified contained a forged signature. And they had my fellow passenger, the man with the baseball cap and the thermos, who testified that I had appeared unconscious when I boarded the bus, and that when I woke, I didn't know where I was. The jury deliberated for 9 hours. Guilty. Attempted murder. Fraud. Forgery. Forgery. I was sitting in the gallery, with my sister on one side and my lawyer on the other, when the verdict came back. My sister grabbed my hand. I didn't cry. I'd expected to, had been bracing for it for weeks. But when the word came out, I just felt something release. Something that had been pulled taut for months and months, released. I cried later. In the car, in the parking garage, while my sister sat beside me and didn't say anything. I cried for the 6 years. For the house with the wraparound porch that I'd had to sell. For the woman I was before I knew what I knew, who believed that age meant stability, who believed she could tell the difference between warmth and performance. I cried for the phone call in March that I hadn't believed. My sister, when I finally stopped, handed me a gas station receipt to blow my nose on, which is very her. And then she said, for what it's worth, I wish I had been wrong. I said, I know you do. She said, I'm glad you're here. I said, me too. There are things I want people to understand who haven't lived through something like this. The first is that believing someone is not stupidity. I trusted my husband for 6 years because he was careful and patient and gave me no clear reason not to. My sister saw something once, from a distance, and I dismissed it, and I understand now why I did that, because the alternative meant dismantling my entire life, and no one does that readily. We believe the people we love because that is what love requires. What he did, the planning, the patience, the deliberate construction of a false life, that is not something a sane, caring person can easily anticipate. The second is that the people who love you will see things before you do. My sister saw something. I didn't listen. I think about what might have happened if I trusted her, and I also think about the fact that I can't change it, and I try to sit with both of those things. The third is that recovery is not linear and it is not neat. I have good weeks and bad ones. I sold the studio for a while. Not permanently, but I needed to step back. I spent 3 months with my mother in Columbus. I went to therapy twice a week and then once a week, and now whenever I need it. I dated someone briefly and it didn't work, and that was okay. I bought a small house, mine, just mine, in a neighborhood in Asheville not far from where I used to live. A bungalow, again because that's apparently who I am. No wraparound porch this time. Just a small front stoop with 2 chairs and a view of the street. I sit out there in the mornings with coffee. Real coffee, made by me, in my own kitchen. My sister calls almost every day. Usually around 8 a.m., before her shift, when she's in her car in the hospital parking lot eating whatever she grabbed for breakfast. We talk for 10 minutes, or we talk for an hour. She tells me about her patients. She's a nurse, which I don't think I mentioned, and I tell her about whatever I'm working on, whichever client, whichever room. She was right about my husband. She was right and I told her she wasn't, and she never once said I told you so. That's what real love looks like. Not the slow, warm smile. Not the arm around your waist walking you toward a bus you didn't choose to be on. Real love is a phone call at midnight. Real love is driving through the dark because your sister said she needed you, no questions first. I know the difference now. I carry that with me. I used to think that being a good person was enough to protect you from bad things. That if you were faithful and kind and worked hard and loved someone honestly, the universe would balance that out somehow. It doesn't work that way. I know that now. What actually protects you is paying attention, not paranoia. Just the willingness to look at what's in front of you without flinching. My sister looked. I didn't. And the difference between those two things almost cost me everything. I've thought a lot about what kind of person my husband was, not the surface version. The slow, warm smile, the arm around my waist. But underneath that, what it takes to plan something like this over months. To research a sedative. To forge a signature. To stand in a police station and cry on cue while your wife is unconscious on a bus to Memphis. That's not a crime of passion. That's a failure of character so deep and so long-standing that it had its own infrastructure. He hadn't just done something wrong that night. He had been becoming that person for years, maybe decades, one small compromise at a time, and I had been too busy believing the version of him he performed for me to notice the construction underneath. I don't say that to blame myself. I say it because I think integrity, the real kind, the kind that holds even when no one is watching, either grows or it erodes. There's no standing still. My husband let his erode. He made choices, quietly and consistently. that moved him further from the person he could have been. And eventually, those choices were so numerous and so embedded that doing something monstrous to another human being became to him a logistical problem to be solved. My sister is the person who saved my life, and she did it with a phone call and a full tank of gas. She didn't hesitate. She didn't second guess whether she'd be believed or whether I deserved it after the way I dismissed her. She just acted immediately, clearly, without drama. That kind of clear-headed courage in a crisis doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from knowing who you are before the crisis arrives. She'd always been that person. I just hadn't needed her to be that person for me until that night. I think about the woman I was before this, and I don't dislike her. She was trusting. She worked hard. She built something real. But she didn't always think critically about the things she most wanted to believe, and that gap between what she hoped was true and what was actually true was exactly the space my husband moved through. Closing that gap isn't cynicism, it's just clarity. It's the kind of careful, honest thinking that asks hard questions even when the answers might hurt. I'm still in Asheville. I sit on my front stoop most mornings and drink my coffee and watch the street wake up. It took a long time before those mornings felt like mine, before a quiet room felt safe instead of suspicious, before I could accept a kind gesture without calculating the angle. But I got there, not because anything magical happened, because I kept going anyway. Because my sister kept calling, because my lawyer kept fighting, because the man on the bus turned around and asked if I was okay, and that small human decency cracked something open. We get through things the same way we get broken by them. One small moment at a time. The difference is what we choose to do inside each one.